There is a strange, almost uncomfortable truth hiding inside the word discipline that most people never actually confront. We treat discipline as a means to an end, something you endure now so that something better arrives later. Wake up early so you can be productive. Resist the extra hour of sleep so you can build the career. Push through the discomfort so the reward eventually shows up. But the Stoics understood something far more radical than this transactional view of discipline, and it's the reason certain people seem to have success, simply arrive at their door, again and again, almost as an afterthought, while everyone else is still negotiating with themselves about whether today is the day they finally start. Today, we are going to walk through exactly what the Stoics meant by discipline, not as a tool for achieving outcomes, but as a complete restructuring of character so total that favorable outcomes become, in a very real sense, inevitable. Stay with me until the end, because the final section of this video reframes the entire relationship between effort and success in a way that most people never encounter in their lifetime. Welcome back to Accent Stoic, the channel where ancient philosophy meets the battles of modern life. If you're new here, welcome. You've arrived at exactly the right moment. And if you've been here before, you already know what we do. We go into the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the letters of Seneca, and the discourses of Epictetus, and we pull out what has survived 2,000 years because it actually works. If that's what you're here for, hit subscribe now, because today's video goes as deep as anything we've made. The foundational principle: discipline is not a strategy, it's an identity. Before we get into the specific practices, we need to correct a misunderstanding that quietly sabotages almost everyone who tries to become disciplined. Most people approach discipline as a series of external behaviors: waking early, exercising, working hard, avoiding distraction, performed in service of a future outcome they want. This is discipline as strategy, and it fails constantly because strategies are optional the moment they become inconvenient, and inconvenience arrives daily. The Stoics approach discipline entirely differently. Epictetus taught that the goal of philosophy was not to acquire a set of impressive external behaviors, but to transform prohairesis, the moral character, the will itself, so completely that virtuous action stopped requiring willpower and simply became who you were. He wrote, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Notice the order: identity first, action second, as a natural consequence rather than a forced effort. This is the entire secret behind people who seem to have success chase them rather than the reverse. It isn't that they have more willpower than you. It's that they have restructured their identity so thoroughly around specific values: patience, integrity, consistent effort, honesty about their own limitations, that the actions producing success have become simply what they do, the way breathing is simply what a living body does. There's no daily negotiation because the negotiation was settled once at the level of identity rather than being reopened every single morning. Consider the difference between two people trying to build the same skill, say a demanding craft or a difficult body of knowledge. The first person relies on discipline as strategy. They decide each morning whether today is a good day to practice, weighing motivation against fatigue, mood against convenience. Some days the strategy wins, many days it doesn't, because a strategy that requires daily renegotiation will inevitably lose some of those negotiations, simply as a matter of probability over enough days. The second person has stopped negotiating entirely. Practicing the craft is simply part of who they understand themselves to be, in the same category as brushing their teeth. Not something requiring motivation, because it was never framed as optional to begin with. Over a year, the difference between these two people is not subtle. It is the entire difference between someone who has made progress and someone who has made excuses, and neither of them necessarily started with more willpower than the other. Principle 1. You become what you repeatedly choose, not what you occasionally intend. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that sounds almost mathematically simple, but contains one of the deepest truths in the entire Stoic tradition. Our life is what our thoughts make it, not our intentions, not our aspirations, our actual, repeated, habitual thoughts and choices. Here is where most people go wrong in pursuit of discipline. They mistake a strong intention, felt intensely in a single moment, for actual character. You feel powerfully motivated on a Sunday evening, plan out an ambitious week, and by Wednesday the plan has quietly dissolved. Not because the intention wasn't real, but because intention and character are entirely different things. Character is built through repetition, not through the intensity of a single decision. The Stoics called the process of building virtuous habit askesis, training, the same root that gives us the word ascetic. It implies deliberate, repeated practice, not a single transformative moment. Seneca compared this to physical training explicitly, noting that no athlete becomes strong through a single, however intense, workout. Strength is the residue of thousands of repetitions, most of them unremarkable individually, that accumulate into something the person eventually simply is. This reframes the entire project of discipline. The question is never, how motivated do I feel today? Because motivation is unreliable and largely irrelevant to the outcome. The question is, what did I actually repeatedly choose this week, regardless of how I felt while choosing it? Success finds people who have made a specific set of choices so many times that those choices have become identity rather than effort. There's a practical way to test whether you've actually internalized this principle or are still relying on motivation dressed up as discipline. Ask yourself honestly, on the days you felt least like doing the work, what actually happened? If the honest answer is that the work usually still got done, just with more internal friction, you're closer to the Stoic version of discipline than you might think. If the honest answer is that low motivation days reliably become skipped days, the identity hasn't actually been rebuilt yet. You're still operating on the old model where feeling matches doing, and the two are treated as if they must always travel together. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire beset by plague, war, and betrayal for nearly 2 decades, almost certainly did not feel motivated on the majority of the mornings he sat down to write his private reflections. The writing happened anyway, because by that point in his life it was no longer a question of feeling. It was simply what he did. Principle 2. Radical ownership of what is actually yours to control. Epictetus built his entire philosophical system on a single foundational distinction, and understanding it changes the entire psychological experience of pursuing discipline. Some things are within our control, our effort, our choices, our attitude, our character. Some things are not outcomes, other people's decisions, timing, luck, the market, the weather. Here is why this matters enormously for the relationship between discipline and success. Most people quietly, unconsciously make their discipline conditional on results they cannot control. They work hard for a period, don't see the external reward arrive on schedule, and interpret this as evidence that the discipline itself has failed, when in fact discipline was never supposed to guarantee a specific timeline of external reward in the first place. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Applied to discipline specifically, this means radically separating your effort, which is entirely yours to control, from the outcome which depends on countless factors outside your control: market conditions, other people's decisions, timing, sheer chance. The disciplined Stoic keeps showing up, keeps doing the work, keeps maintaining the standard, entirely independent of whether the results have arrived yet, because the discipline was never actually about the results in the first place. It was about becoming a specific kind of person. The results, when they eventually arrive, are simply a natural consequence of that person having existed consistently for long enough. This is why disciplined people appear to have success. Find them. They were never checking the mailbox daily for a reward. They were simply continuing to be who they had already decided to be. And eventually, the external world had no choice but to reflect that back. There's a particular trap worth naming explicitly here because it derails more genuinely hard-working people than almost anything else. Effort and outcome operate on entirely different timelines, and the gap between them can stretch for months or years longer than feels reasonable or fair. This gap is exactly where most people abandon their discipline, not because the discipline has failed, but because they made the understandable but philosophically mistaken assumption that consistent effort should produce a roughly proportional, roughly timely result. The Stoics would tell you this assumption itself is the error. Effort is entirely yours. Timing is not. Confusing the two and quietly measuring your discipline by a calendar that was never yours to control is one of the fastest ways to abandon good habits precisely when they were closest to compounding into something undeniable. Principle 3. The discipline of small, unwitnessed actions. There's a particular Stoic emphasis that almost never gets discussed in modern conversations about discipline, and it might be the most important piece of this entire puzzle. Seneca wrote extensively about the value of actions performed with no audience, no recognition, and no immediate reward. Actions chosen purely because they align with a standard you've set for yourself, entirely independent of whether anyone will ever know you did them. He considered this the truest test of character because a person's behavior when observed by others is heavily influenced by social pressure and reputation management, while a person's behavior when completely alone reveals what they actually value. This matters directly for the relationship between discipline and success because most of the actual work that produces exceptional outcomes happens in exactly this unwitnessed space. The extra hour of preparation nobody sees, the honest self-assessment conducted in private, the difficult skill practiced repeatedly with no one watching, the temptation resisted when no one would have known if you'd given in. Marcus Aurelius, writing his meditations in complete privacy with no intention of publication, modeled this practice perfectly. He held himself to a standard that existed entirely independent of any audience. The person who is only disciplined when being observed has built a performance, not a character, and performances collapse the moment observation stops. The person who has built genuine discipline in the unwitnessed hours has built something durable because it was never dependent on an audience to sustain it in the first place. This is precisely the kind of discipline that eventually produces results too consistent, too substantial to be explained by luck. Results that external observers eventually have no choice but to notice because they were built on a foundation solid enough to survive years of nobody watching. Principle 4. Amor fati, making peace with the difficulty itself. There's a concept the Stoics developed, later made famous by Nietzsche, though its roots are thoroughly Stoic, called amor fati, the love of one's fate, the active embrace of what happens rather than passive resistance to it. Applied to discipline specifically, this becomes something quite different from simply enduring difficulty. It becomes genuinely welcoming the difficulty as the actual substance of the growth you're pursuing. Most people relate to the hard parts of discipline as an obstacle standing between them and their goal, something to be tolerated, minimized, or rushed through as quickly as possible. Marcus Aurelius offered a radically different framing. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The obstacle is not separate from the path to the goal. The obstacle, engaged with properly, is the actual mechanism by which the goal becomes achievable. This reframing changes the entire emotional experience of sustained discipline. If you view the difficult, uncomfortable, unglamorous parts of your work as an unfortunate cost you're paying for a future reward, you will experience discipline as a constant negotiation between the current suffering and the promised future payoff, and that negotiation exhausts people over time. If instead you view the difficulty itself as the actual site of your growth, genuinely welcoming resistance because resistance is precisely what builds the capacity you're trying to develop, the psychological weight of discipline changes entirely. You stop waiting for the difficulty to end so the real progress can begin. You recognize that the difficulty was the progress the entire time. This is not a small semantic distinction. Two people can perform the exact same difficult task in the exact same circumstances and experience it in almost opposite ways, depending entirely on this internal framing. One experiences the hard project, the difficult conversation, the uncomfortable practice session as an obstacle standing between them and the life they actually want, counting down the minutes until it's over. The other experiences the exact same task as the literal substance of the person they're becoming, present and engaged with it, rather than merely enduring it. The task doesn't change. The relationship to the task changes completely, and that relationship is entirely within your control, regardless of what the task itself happens to be. Principle 5. The compounding nature of ordinary days. Here is something that most people intellectually understand, but rarely actually internalize deeply enough to change their behavior. The disciplined life is built almost entirely out of ordinary, forgettable days, not out of a handful of dramatic, memorable ones. Seneca wrote about the practice of the daily review, reflecting honestly each evening on how the day was actually spent, not to punish yourself, but to notice, with total clarity, whether today's choices matched the character you're trying to build. He understood something that modern psychology has since confirmed extensively, that transformation is very rarely the product of dramatic, singular decisions, and almost always the product of thousands of small, individually unremarkable choices, compounding silently over months and years until the accumulated effect becomes undeniable. This has a specific implication for how you should think about your relationship with discipline going forward. Stop waiting to feel like today is a special, motivated day before you act with discipline. The overwhelming majority of the days that actually build the character capable of attracting success will feel completely ordinary while you're living them, mildly tired, mildly unmotivated, nothing dramatic happening at all. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations only on the days he felt inspired. He wrote them, according to the historical record, with remarkable consistency across ordinary days, difficult days, and days of genuine crisis alike. The consistency itself, maintained specifically through the ordinary, unremarkable days, is what eventually produces a result too substantial to be dismissed as luck. It's worth pausing here to notice something almost paradoxical about how this actually feels while it's happening. The days that end up mattering most, in retrospect, when you look back at a year or a decade of accumulated discipline, are almost never the days that felt significant while you were living them. They are ordinary Tuesdays, forgotten within a week of occurring, that happened to contain one more small deposit into a pattern that eventually became undeniable. This means you will very rarely get the emotional satisfaction of knowing in the moment that today's effort particularly mattered. The Stoics would tell you this is precisely why so few people sustain discipline for long enough to see it compound. They are, understandably, looking for a feeling of significance that ordinary days were never designed to provide, and when that feeling doesn't arrive, they mistake its absence for evidence that the effort isn't working. Principle 6. Becoming undistractable by what doesn't matter. The final principle addresses something the Stoics considered essential to sustained discipline, and it's rarely discussed directly in modern conversations about productivity and success. Epictetus taught that most human suffering and most wasted effort comes from investing energy in things outside our control or things that simply don't matter to the character we're trying to build. Applied to discipline specifically, this means the disciplined person has to become someone who has made peace with saying no to distractions, to opportunities that don't align with their actual priorities, to other people's expectations of how their time should be spent, and even to their own passing impulses that don't serve the standard they've committed to. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the danger of what he called scattering yourself across too many concerns, noting that a person who tries to attend fully to everything ends up attending fully to nothing. The disciplined person who eventually finds success arriving at their door has typically said no to an enormous number of things along the way, distractions that felt urgent in the moment but had nothing to do with the actual standard they were building toward. It is worth sitting with, honestly. Every hour spent on something that doesn't serve your actual values is an hour not spent building the compounding discipline described in the previous 5 principles. This isn't about becoming joyless or eliminating rest and pleasure from your life entirely. The Stoics were never interested in that kind of grim austerity. It's about becoming genuinely discerning, saying yes deliberately rather than by default, so that the finite hours available to you are actually spent building the character you've decided to become, rather than being quietly consumed by whatever happens to demand your attention loudest in any given moment. Bringing it all together. Let's step back and look at what we've actually built today. 6 principles. Treating discipline as identity rather than strategy, becoming what you repeatedly choose rather than what you occasionally intend, radical ownership of what is actually yours to control, discipline in small, unwitnessed moments, amor fati toward the difficulty itself, the compounding nature of ordinary, unremarkable days, and becoming undistractable by what doesn't actually matter. That together explains something that looks from the outside almost like luck, but is actually the predictable result of consistent character, sustained over enough time that the world eventually has no choice but to reflect it back. It's the deeper truth behind the title of this video. Success doesn't find disciplined people because the universe rewards effort in some mystical sense. It finds them because sustained, consistent, character-driven action, applied honestly over enough time, produces results that become statistically almost impossible to avoid. The person who has genuinely restructured their identity around these 6 principles isn't hoping for success to arrive. They are simply continuing to be who they've decided to be for long enough that the external world runs out of ways to ignore it. I want to be honest about something before we close, the way I try to be on every video on this channel. None of these 6 principles are quick. There is no version of this philosophy that produces the described result in a week or even in a few months. The Stoics were never in the business of promising fast transformation, and if this video had told you otherwise, it would have been telling you something false. What it offers instead is something the Stoics considered far more valuable than speed, certainty. Not certainty about timing, which remains genuinely outside your control, but certainty about the mechanism itself. A person who genuinely builds identity rather than relying on motivation, who separates effort from outcome, who practices integrity in unwitnessed moments, who welcomes difficulty rather than merely enduring it, who trusts the compounding of ordinary days, and who protects their attention from what doesn't matter, that person is not gambling on success. They are simply constructing it, one unremarkable day at a time, in a way that eventually becomes visible to everyone except themselves, because they were never watching for it in the first place. Here is your challenge for tonight. Not 6 challenges, just one. Look honestly at the 6 principles we've covered and identify the single one where the gap between who you currently are and who you're trying to become is widest. Not the easiest one to fix. The one that actually matters most right now. Spend some real time tonight thinking specifically about what practicing that one principle would look like tomorrow, in an ordinary, unremarkable, easily forgotten day. Marcus Aurelius did not become the philosopher we still study 2,000 years later through a single dramatic transformation. He became that person through the accumulated weight of thousands of ordinary days, practiced with a consistency that had nothing to do with how motivated he felt on any particular morning. That same practice, built one honest, unwitnessed choice at a time, is available to you starting today. If this video gave you something, a shift, a reframe, a moment of recognition, hit the like button. It costs nothing, and it tells us this kind of depth is exactly what you want more of. Leave a comment and tell me honestly, which of these 6 principles do you think will be hardest for you to actually live, not just understand? I read every comment on this channel, and I'll be down there with you. Subscribe to Accent Stoic if you haven't already. We go this deep every single week into philosophy that has survived 2,000 years because it was built for exactly the hardest, most ordinary moments of a real life. Until next time, stay grounded, stay disciplined, and remember what Marcus Aurelius told himself on the mornings the world felt heaviest. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.